Mr. President, one of the most important appointments of a President of the United States is a U.S. Attorney. All across the United States, some 90 U.S. attorneys represent the Department of Justice. They do critical work that is essential for the safety and security of America. And the announcement by this administration of Edward Robert Martin, Jr. to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia raises so many questions that I've come to the floor today. Prior to his appointment as an interim U.S. Attorney, Mr. Edward Robert Martin, Jr. made stunning attacks on federal prosecutors and associated himself with individuals who present a threat to our nation. Mr. Martin was a leader of the so-called, quote, Stop the Steal movement, which illegally and from a ridiculous point of view pushed that the 2020 election was not determinative of who was elected president. Mr. Martin himself was on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th and has repeatedly downplayed the violence perpetrated against law enforcement that day. That happens to be a crime scene which I'm familiar with as a member of the Senate because we were exposed to the crowd storming into the Capitol, storming into the floor of the Senate chamber. Mr. Martin posted the following on social media, quote, like Mardi Gras in D.C. today, love, faith, and joy, ignore fake news, close quote. That's Mr. Martin's description of what was happening in this Capitol building as 140 law enforcement officers were being attacked. Mr. Martin once labeled federal prosecutors in D.C. Mr. Martin once labeled federal prosecutors in D.C. employees of the very office he now seeks to lead as terrorists, quote unquote, for pursuing stiff sentence against violent January 6 rioters. Mr. Martin said, and get this, quote, oath keepers are all of us, in response to a Justice Department prosecution of the leader of this domestic violent extremist organization for seditious conspiracy. Mr. Martin called prosecutors' treatment of insurrectionist Christopher Worrell outrageous. This is a man seeking full-time position as U.S. Attorney, saying that the prosecution of Christopher Worrell was outrageous. He falsely claimed Mr. Worrell was only in the fray a bit, not much, but a bit. In fact, Mr. Worrell, a member of Proud Boys, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for assaulting a group of police officers here in the Capitol with deadly and dangerous weapons. The very day that Mr. Martin called Mr. Worrell's treatment by prosecutors outrageous, Mr. Worrell was a fugitive from the law. He had cut off his GPS ankle monitor 4 days before his scheduled sentencing on August 14, 2023, and was not apprehended until 6 weeks later. Mr. Martin also has extensive ties to this man. His name is Timothy Hale-Cusanelli. He was a January 6 rioter who prosecutors describe as a subscriber of, quote, white supremacist, Nazi sympathizer ideologies that drive his enthusiasm for another civil war, end of quote. At Mr. Hale-Cusanelli's sentencing hearing, Judge Trevor McFadden, who was appointed by President Trump, said, quote, of Mr. Hale-Cusanelli before him, statements and actions like yours make Jewish people less safe and less confident they can participate as equal members of our society. Beyond inaccurately portraying Mr. Hale-Cusanelli as a victim of an unjust conviction, Mr. Martin has inexplicably praised Mr. Hale-Cusanelli's character and intellect, despite Mr. Hale-Cusanelli's extensive, well-known personal history of anti-Semitism, misogyny, and racism. According to one of his co-workers, Mr. Hale-Cusanelli once said, and I quote, Hitler should have finished the job, close quote. Further, Mr. Hale-Cusanelli reportedly claimed that he would kill all Jews and eat them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and he wouldn't need to season them because the salt from their tears would make it flavorful enough. Can you imagine this statement being made by a man who is a close friend of the President's suggestion for U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia? One co-worker recalled Mr. Hale-Cusanelli saying that babies born with deformities or disabilities should be shot in the forehead, close quote. Another told authorities that Mr. Hale-Cusanelli referred to black people. I can't use the words. I can't repeat them on the floor of the Senate, but it is terrible. According to videos Mr. Hale-Cusanelli himself recorded while storming the Capitol on January 6, he berated an officer guarding the west front of the Capitol, stating, "F you, the revolution will be televised," close quote. Days after the riot, a confidential human source recorded Mr. Hale-Cusanelli saying he wished for there to be another civil war, so he could also say he would give, quote, Jewish people 24 hours to leave the country, close quote. Sickening, outrageous. But stay tuned to what I'm about to report. In September 2024, Mr. Martin, Mr. Martin, the nominee for U.S. Attorney, presented this man, Mr. Hale-Cusanelli, with an award at the Trump Bedminster Club in New Jersey. Mr. Martin called Mr. Hale-Cusanelli, quote, an extraordinary man he is, an extraordinary leader. After Mr. Hale-Cusanelli concluded his remarks, he hugged Mr. Martin, who then returned to the podium to say, quote, it's one of the goals of many is to make sure the world, and especially America, hears more from Tim because he's so extraordinary. This shocking conduct necessitates sworn testimony from Mr. Martin. He needs to be brought before the Senate Judiciary Committee and answer for his relationship with this individual. How could anyone be taken seriously as a U.S. attorney with this in his background? He deserves his day under oath to explain it. That's why the Democratic members of the Senate Judiciary Committee have asked Senator Grassley to hold a special hearing for Mr. Martin to explain this and many other things that he has done. The list is long, but the list is also very troubling. Mr. Martin has regularly threatened to prosecute various government employees, members of Congress, and press outlets in an apparent attempt to chill their lawful speech. On February 3rd, 2025, Mr. Martin informed Elon Musk that we will pursue any and all legal action against anybody who impedes your work. 4 days later, he followed up with Mr. Musk and stated, if people are discovered to have broken the law or even acted simply unethically, we will investigate them and we will chase them to the end of the earth to hold them accountable. On February 24th, Mr. Martin specifically targeted the Associated Press, writing, quote, as President Trump's lawyers, we are proud to fight to protect his leadership as our president, and we are vigilant in standing against entities like the Associated Press that refuse to put America first. Finally, since his nomination to serve as U.S. Attorney for District of Columbia, Mr. Martin appears to have attempted to scrub much of his public commentary. For example, nearly 1,000 hours of his podcast have been removed from online platforms, such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts, interfering with the committee's ability to thoroughly examine his record. He's trying to cleanse his past so he doesn't have to explain it. But the fact is, his relationship with this man, presenting him an award at the president's personal club in New Jersey, and then heaping praise on him afterwards, is a clear indication to me that he should never be seriously considered for this job of U.S. Attorney. But let him come before us. Under oath, let him explain it. Let him try to tell us why this man is such an extraordinary leader, an extraordinary person, and why this brand of anti-Semitism which he peddles should be tolerated by anyone, let alone the President of the United States. Mr. President, I yield the floor.